My life has been full of brushes with the paranormal. I was born and raised in a 100-year-old haunted house, and things have been progressively stranger since then. A lot of these incidents on odd happenings were at my former job. I was a coal burner at a power plant located on the shore of Lake Eerie. The plant was built on a nexus of sorts. Every stripe of supernatural weirdness you could ever hope to experience or be subjected to was there. As a security guard, you're gonna see all kinds of shit, whether you like to or not. And in fact, we had a high turnover rate there because of all the weird things that people couldn't explain. Out of all the incidents though, what I'm about to tell you was hands down the winner. We used to do vehicle patrols on a nearly constant basis. One of the nicer routes was along the lake on a dirt road that sat about a story above the lake looking down at the beach. I used to park the patrol vehicle and sneak down to the beach when the mood struck me. But I'd been denied this pleasure because the corpse of a deer had washed in from the lake, bringing in it the fine bouquet of reek and nastiness. One evening, while a storm was blowing in off the lake, I offhandedly checked to see if that deceased deer had been sucked back into the lake by the waves, and off my beach I saw something that broke my mind. Some bear-sized creature was eating the dead deer carcass. It was twice the size of the deer. It had orange-brown hair covering its entire body, and it had a back hump like a hyena. The neck was long and ended in a round, blunted head like a sloth. The forelegs were twice the size and thickness of the back legs, and it was eating huge chunks of deer as the waves from the lake washed over it. I stopped the truck and just stared at this thing. It seemed to notice me, and when it looked up, it locked gazes with me and stared me down. The eyes seemed to be glowing orange. Not unusual for light reflecting off an animal's eyes, but it was dim out, and the truck's headlights were pointed away from it. So I don't know if this thing self-illuminated, or if it was reflecting some other light out there. It stared me down, and then loped off down the beach. It moved like the gargoyle dogs from Ghostbusters, like a really weird hopping spring. It was pulling itself from the front legs and pushing off with the back. The next day I snuck down there to look at the deer. Round bites had been taken out of it. No tearing from teeth, just rounded plugs cut away clean, even through the shoulder blade. There were no scrapes at all from the bone that I could see from these teeth that this thing was using to eat the flesh of this deer. Just sheared off holes. The waves cleared away most of the prints, but I did find one in the sand. It was about 6 inches across, 7 inches long, and 3 inches deep in the sand. 4 claws and this weird thumb off to the side made this print up. I could put my entire finger in the claw holes. My question to you is, what the hell is it that I saw? We don't have bears or wolves around here, and there's not a coyote or fox alive that gets that big. This was some kind of creature that I don't have a name for. Something that isn't in a science book. Something that people haven't identified as a real animal. Any answers out there are appreciated because I'd love to know what it was that I saw. The only thing I could think of at this point was that I came in contact with a real-life werewolf. But that's crazy talk because werewolves are just movie creatures, right? Well, based on what I saw, I'd like to argue the fact whether or not these creatures are real. So I have this cousin that lives in the swamps, and says that one night he was camping out with friends, about 4 of them, and he said they were lying in their tents to sleep when they heard a howling noise close to them, and when he went out to look, he saw and heard nothing. So naturally, he just went back in his tent and went to sleep. About 3 hours later, he said he heard what sounded like talking, but when he looked around for the tent that he shared with his friends, nobody was awake. He said the talking stopped once he called for his friend Mike. He said he heard a slight growl, and then when he went to unzip his tent, that something out there roared so loud that his friends all awoke with a jump. He said his friend Jake asked him, "What in the hell was that?" And my cousin responded with, "I don't know, let's check it out." So Jake and Tim, who is my cousin, went on the lookout while their friends got their guns ready, because they were about to go hunt whatever the hell it was that was out there making those noises. They all went out to look, and what Tim said he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. He said he saw a great big brown or black animal that looked like a bear and wolf mixed together. He said it looked straight at them and snarled. Tim said they were too frightened to move, and this animal, or whatever it was, had greenish eyes that acted like they were just taunting them, daring them to move, until Tim's friend Blake shot this monster thing in its neck. Tim said this thing screamed in pain and swung its arms. Something that he'll never forget was the noise that this thing made. He said it was unearthly. Tim said that this thing took off running like a monkey would, and after that, they all packed up and left as soon as this thing was out of sight. Honestly, I don't know if I believe him or not. I don't know if he really had an encounter with a dogman, but when he was telling me, I could still see this residual fear on his face. He always told me to never go out by yourself in the forest or the swamp, because you never know what lies ahead of you. By the way, I love your channel. I think it's cool that someone makes a channel about these demonic creatures instead of being afraid to talk about them. I'd love to try and find a dogman myself. I know it sounds crazy, but I need to see it to believe it. I know Tim believes in these things because he swears that what he saw was true. He says this thing stood about 6 feet tall, maybe even taller. Its snout looked like a dog's, and its ears stood up straight. Tim said it had claws, but no tail, and that it also smelled of rotten meat. It had 4 legs, but stood like a human, but it took off like a monkey would, running on its knuckles. He said it had a very canine-like appearance, and the only 2 things that I could think of that matched that description would be a dogman or a werewolf. Tim told me, and I quote, "I will never go out and hunt at night in the swamps again." He said he's never heard anyone else with another encounter in this area before. He's still okay, although he doesn't go out there anymore, and if he does, he's heavily armed, and he's never gone camping in those parts again. Sometimes I think about going out there. Maybe I'll start off by going out there in the day to see if I see anything. You'll be the first person I tell if I do come across a dogman, or maybe even a werewolf. The swamps here are full of legends of the rougarou, and werewolves, and dogman. I think all 3 of them are different species. They can't all be the same thing, because all the descriptions are different. I don't know what it was that Tim saw, but one day I hope to find out. Thank you for presenting this, and I hope everybody listening has a good night. In March 2015, I woke up around 3 a.m. I have no idea why. Usually I wake up to drink water or use the bathroom, but I needed to do neither of those. Anyways, I was living in Southern California at the time, near Camp Pendleton, and where I lived, there was my neighborhood and just wilderness after that. There was nothing beyond my neighborhood for miles, just land. And just an FYI, I have always been into the supernatural, but I don't think I really believed it until this experience. Before I went to sleep, I opened my window because it was hot, and I had my curtains open and my shades open and pulled to make sure that the air was getting in. So, at 3 a.m., I wake up and just looked out of my window, which was next to my bed, and I thought I saw someone standing at the crosswalk across the street. I was just thinking, that's so weird, because usually we didn't have runners or early morning walkers until about 4:45 a.m. So I got up and went to my window so I could get a closer look, and what I saw, I will never forget. This thing was standing, but its legs were bent, and it had some white fur covering the body. However, I could still see some skin. Its back was hunched over, and its face looked like some sort of dog's. If this creature was standing straight up, I'd say it would be about 7 or 8 feet tall. Now mind you, this was at 3 a.m., so I was like Wow, okay, you're hallucinating. You need to go back to sleep. However, I was literally paralyzed and could not take my eyes off this creature. Its nose and ears just look so similar to a dog's or some sort of wolf or coyote. Where I lived, coyotes were very prevalent. However, they never really came into the neighborhood. So, as you can tell, I was just completely shocked and nervous, and as I was about to shut my window, this thing turned its head, and I felt it staring right at me. It was standing directly under a streetlight, so I could see its features very clearly, and its eyes were so black, but somehow they looked like they were shining, to the point where you could feel them staring right into your soul. That did it for me. I slammed my window shut, I pulled down the blinds, closed the curtains, and jumped right into bed while pulling the covers over my face. I never went back to sleep that night. Flash forward 2 years, in June of 2017, and I again woke up, but this time I was just hungry. So I went downstairs to get some food and sat at my kitchen table. At this point, I'd already put that encounter in the back of my mind. I never saw it again, so I never thought anything of it. But here I am, sitting in this chair, with my back facing the window on the side of the house. The window was about a foot off the ground, and it was open about 10 inches, because I guess my mom forgot to shut it or something. Now that window had no screen, because it got torn somehow, and we just never got around to replacing it. Anyways, I had my earbuds in, and I was watching a movie, but I heard a noise, even through my earbuds. I couldn't tell if it was from the movie or from outside, so I paused it and I listened again. And then I heard heavy breathing. But I'd never heard this kind of breathing before, and it sounded like it was coming from directly behind me, right outside the window. The breathing was rough, rigid, and sounded not anything like a human. I was too scared to turn around, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and I had goosebumps everywhere. The breathing lasted for about 2 minutes, and then I heard heavy footsteps, as if this thing was walking away. About 10 minutes passed, then I shut the window and locked it. I closed the curtains and ran upstairs to my room. I felt like I had to wait that long. 1, because I was so scared, and 2, I just wanted to make sure that the thing was gone before I made noise and alerted it that I was there. I told my parents about my first encounter the next day after that happened. I was 16 at the time and still living with them. They just kind of looked at me and laughed and said I was seeing things, and that it was probably just a coyote. After my second encounter, I told them that day too, and that time they really thought I was just tired or hearing things. My question to everyone out there, though, is, have any of you experienced something similar to this? Was it just a coyote, or do you guys think I was hallucinating? It's been bothering me for a while now, and I had to get my story out there because I can't deal with not having any answers. Before I start this, I just feel it's an obligation to say that I am a skeptic of everything paranormal. I've been trying to convince myself that I didn't see a large, hairy hominid thing in the woods all those years ago. But the truth is, I did see a large, hairy hominid all those years ago. This was somewhere around the mid-2000s when I was in middle school. I was staying at a friend's house for the night in the backwoods of Michigan. His name was Jacob. Immediately behind Jacob's house was a few acres of woods that led to a lake. If you went straight back into the woods from his backyard, there was a path that went straight to the lake, which was intersected at 90 degrees by another path about halfway to the lake, probably a quarter mile from the backyard to the lake. If you went straight down the path from the backyard, then turned left at the intersection, the path was a downhill grade, followed by a flat portion, followed by an uphill grade, which eventually ran into a 2-lane country road, one of those 55-mile-per-hour ones that goes on for miles with not so much as 1 or 2 houses for miles and miles. It was late in the afternoon, and the sun was just starting to set. We, being middle school boys, were running around the woods all afternoon playing with fake guns and stuff. Good times, you know. Absolutely nothing leading up to this point was strange. No weird feelings, no odd unidentified sounds, no paranoia or ghost stories prior to playing in the woods. Just two friends running around having a great time outside. We were basically pretending to be army guys for this portion of our play. At one point, Jacob decided to run off, saying something about flanking the enemy. He dashes off to my left. I started creeping through the woods, pretending to shoot down bad guys as I went. I found myself standing at the intersection that I described earlier. Straight forward was towards the lake. To the left was the path that went down, then back up to the road. I was standing looking diagonally between the two paths, when I hear some faint sound slightly off to my right, towards the lake. What I saw made my whole body tingle, in the worst possible way. About 50 feet, maybe more, maybe less, towards the lake, and just behind a tree, I see this face and this shoulder and arm peeking around it. The most terrifying part for me, though, was that this head and arm was about 2 feet higher than you'd expect a human's head to be. Before I could even properly observe this face, which was undoubtedly hairy, it snapped back behind the tree as if it realized that I could see it. The color of this figure was light gray, like your average cement sidewalk. Because of that, I was unsure of what this thing was. My first couple thoughts were sheer confusion and fear. Then, in my frozen state, I remembered that Jacob was wearing a t-shirt almost exactly that shade of gray. I tried whisper shouting his name towards this now hidden figure. I called out maybe 2 or 3 times, went off about 50 feet behind me and to my left, down the path that led towards the road. Jacob emerged from the thicker trees. This was in the complete opposite direction from the figure that I saw. There was no way in hell he could have snuck around me in that short of a time frame and made it back behind me. To further drive the point home, it was fall, and the ground was covered in layers and layers of dry, dead, deciduous leaves. The crunch from those leaves was very distinct, and you couldn't avoid it. So again, I repeat, there was no way that Jacob could have snuck around me. Anyways, I guess Jacob had heard me calling out, and from just down that slight decline, he looked up and asked me what was going on. I pointed off into the trees, where I had seen that figure, and said in a normal volume, "I saw something big over there." As soon as I finished that sentence, I mean the very second that I finished that sentence, whatever it was that I saw started stomping off towards the road, parallel to the path we were on, but probably 50 to 100 feet deeper into the woods. Woods which were too thick to see anything at that distance. For some god-forsaken reason, we tried to run after it. The both of us were athletic as a 6th or 7th grader could be. We played tons of sports and were fast kids. We were hauling ass down the path parallel to this beast, as fast as we could sprint, and yet it was obviously smoking us. The road, if I remember correctly, was a solid quarter mile from the intersection of the two paths. We had maybe just finished running down the downhill portion when this monster was already to the road. And believe it or not, we could tell where it was from the crunching of the leaves, and you could hear these massive footsteps clear as day, even while we were running. That's just how heavy this thing seemed. When we realized it was getting to the road, we also realized that a car was coming. I shit you not, as soon as the crunching leaves stopped and the thing stepped out onto the road, this car slammed on its brakes and pounded on the horn. I mean, this car's tires screeched for a solid 3 to 4 seconds at least. When the car finally stopped, we heard the leaves start crunching on the other side of the road, and then the car slammed on the gas, peeled out of there, and took off like a bat out of hell. Whatever they saw scared the hell out of them. Now keep in mind, we could only hear all of this, but all those noises painted a pretty good picture for us. We didn't see the car, so there's no way we could ever track the person down to ask what in the hell it was that they saw that scared them so bad that they decided to speed the hell out of there. But I wouldn't be surprised if their story is out there on the internet somewhere. I'm always on the lookout for a tale of somebody talking about the time they almost turned Bigfoot into roadkill. Anyways, we finally made it to where we could see the road and crossed to the other side. On that side, it was mostly flat woods as far as the eye could see. Nothing but trees, trees, and more trees. No sight nor sound of this beast. We waited for a bit, but didn't see anything, so we decided to go back home. A few things to note. Was this a Bigfoot for sure? I can't say. But what I do know is that it was tall, hairy, gray, and 100% bipedal. There was absolutely no mistaking the sound of it running. It's funny though. There's descriptions and videos of Bigfoot walking and moving far faster than a normal human. But I'm almost sure this thing was sprinting. The speed at which it reached the road was utterly unbelievable. It ran a quarter mile in probably close to 20 seconds. And trust me, I understand how absurd that is. So here's my question, because after researching, I'm not convinced that it really was a Bigfoot. Could this have been a Sasquatch? I don't know if they move that fast. The only other thing that I could think of through my research was that I encountered a Dogman. I didn't get a good look at its face enough to tell you whether or not it was primate or canine, so I guess it could be either or. I just know that this thing was huge, fast, and completely out of this world. I have a Dogman story, and I need to share it with you. For safety reasons, I'm only going to tell you the state that it was in, which was Montana. I'm not going to tell you the area. I know there's a lot of people out there that want to prove that these things exist, but I'm not going to have your blood on my hands. For privacy reasons, I'm changing the names of the people that were involved, which were myself. I'll call myself Jeremy. My brother, who we'll call Richard, and our cousin, who I'm going to refer to as Garcia. We went out to a cabin for my bachelor party. I wanted to escape the city life for a couple of days. We planned on being there for 4 days, but we ended up staying there only 2. The cabin itself was borrowed from a family friend. When we got there, we noticed it looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. It wasn't broken down or derelict. It was just unkempt and dusty. We planned on just hanging out, going down to the lake, having a good time, and drinking a lot of alcohol. In fact, we brought more alcohol than we could consume in a week. When we got there, we unpacked, drank some beers, and took a celebratory shot. Then we decided to go down to the lake and swim for a while. As we went down there, we talked about how beautiful the land was. The trees were ginormous. They were big and beautiful, and the forest was noisy with the sounds of birds and bugs. It was beautiful, quiet, and relaxing. And the lake was refreshing. It was everything that we were hoping for that weekend. As we sat on the beach, though, is the first time things were unusual. Because all of the life that was going on in the forest suddenly went quiet, all at once. It was literally like somebody hit a mute button, and then everything was quiet. This was hair standing on end creepy. I thought maybe there was a bear or something in the area, so we decided to go back to the cabin. We hung out at the cabin for the rest of the day, and everything else was normal. The only thing out of the ordinary is we saw a bunch of coyotes running by. Not right up to the cabin, kind of far off, but close enough to where we could still identify them as coyotes. I thought that was kind of weird, since usually they're nocturnal and pretty stealthy. That night, as we sat outside, the forest was again creepy quiet. I thought maybe that bear, or a wolf, or a mountain lion, or something was out there that was spooking the wildlife. So we went inside, and didn't think anything else of it. We just really didn't want to run into whatever it was that was making everything so quiet. Little did we know that what that thing was going to haunt us the rest of our lives. The next day was uneventful, though. We drank more than we should have, we kicked back more than we would like to, and we didn't really get anything done. We went back to the lake, and the forest was loud again. But that night, at 10 p.m., is when all hell broke loose. We were sitting in the living room, just bullshitting and drinking again. The curtains were about half open in the living room. Garcia saw it first. He jumped up and yelled, "What the hell is that?" Only he didn't say hell. He literally went from a sitting position on the couch to standing on top of it in a split second, pointing out of the window. Richard and I turned around and saw the same thing. It was a monster. Some kind of wolf. It was crouching down looking into the window. The window at the top was 6 feet tall at least, and this thing was crouching down. Just how tall was this thing? That answer I can never give you. We all backed away in fear, in shock of what this thing was. We didn't know what it was. It was big. It was hairy. It was this light reddish brown color. To me, it looked like a werewolf. It had this long snout and this tongue that was sticking out like it was panting. It had big ears, and they swiveled on top of its head. This thing looked at all three of us, each one of us individually, before it darted off. We ran into the hallway and all stood close together, trying to see back into the living room, trying to look back out at that window. And this thing, it poked its head around again and looked into the room. We ran into the back room where my brother kept his guns. We loaded them, just in case this thing tried to get into the house. I mustered up the courage to run to the curtains and throw the blinds shut. And then we heard the door jiggle. At this point, the fear that I felt, it was 100% pure, undiluted fear. I thought I was going to die. I thought this thing was going to come in and kill all three of us. I thought about not making it to my wedding. I thought about my fiancée and how she was going to have to bury me, or what was left of me, instead of standing up at an altar, telling me how much that she loved me. This fear was almost catatonic. I was more scared that night than I have ever been my entire life. I don't know why this thing tried to open the door. As big as it was, it could have busted the damn thing down, or crashed through the window. The jiggling stopped, but I could still hear it outside. It was sniffing at the door and making a grunting sound. Again, I almost went catatonic. My legs were weak. I felt like I was going to throw up. I looked over at my cousin and my brother. They were pale and shaking. Suddenly, the sniffing stopped, and it was quiet for a couple of minutes. I ran back over to my brother and my cousin, and we just stood there like a bunch of idiots, not knowing what to do. And then the other door at the back of the cabin started to jiggle too. Luckily, they were both locked. I remember not even being able to take full breaths. I was just taking these short, tiny breaths. I was on the verge of hyperventilating. Richard and Garcia were both just as scared as I was. They were whispering about what to do, although none of us knew exactly what to do. They were trying to tell each other that it would be okay and to calm down, that if this thing couldn't get through the doors, we might be safe. But then we started talking about what we would do if it did crash through the windows or break down the door. None of us had an answer. We caught a glimpse of it in the kitchen window, peering its face in and looking around. I don't know what this thing was looking for. I don't know if it was just curious to see what was going on inside, or if it was hunting us. But with my mind racing at 1,000 thoughts a second, and my imagination completely taking over about this thing crashing in and killing all of us, the only thing I could think is that it was looking in there to hunt us. This went on for hours. Doors would jiggle, we could hear scratching at windows, the sniffing and the panting continued through the cracks of the windows and the doors. We could see this thing moving behind the curtains. It was just too much to deal with. I wanted to pass out. I wanted to just run to the truck and get away from there, and leave all of this nightmare behind. But I knew we were stuck there. We weren't trying to go to the truck. That would be suicide. This thing would catch us and tear us apart. About 2:45, we heard this excited barking noise coming from outside, and I knew that it was this thing. It was still out there. It was still waiting for us to come out. It was still trying to figure out how to get in. We caught another glimpse of this thing in the curtains in Richard's bedroom. On the side of the curtain, it was only open about 2 inches, but this thing still figured out that it could see through there. How smart were these things? It was peering in, still looking for us. But this thing, it looked different than the other one. It looked darker. For all I know, there could have been more than one out there. Maybe that's why the barking was going on. Because it was calling to another one. Or it was talking to another one. Or they were arguing over who got to go in there and kill us. Again, I'll never have these answers for you. I didn't put my gun down the entire time that we were there. I held it like it was the last thing on earth that could save me. Although, looking at the gun and looking at that thing outside, I don't think it would have done anything to it. Hours passed by, but it felt like an eternity. Each minute felt like an hour. Each hour felt like a lifetime. But finally, about 4:30, everything stopped. We didn't see it moving around anymore. We didn't hear the doors jiggling. We didn't hear the scratching or the barking. But we also didn't look outside to see if it was still out there. We were finally comfortable enough to sit down and take a load off, but we all sat with our backs together. We made a game plan to leave as soon as the sun came up. We'd only grab our important stuff and leave all the other crap behind. When we saw the sun finally come in through the curtains, we got the hell out of there. We only took our backpacks, only the things that mattered. We went out there with our guns drawn, drove out of there and didn't look back. We left everything else there. As soon as I got home, I held my fiancée tighter than I ever have, and I told her everything that happened to me. She didn't question me, not one single time. She's a believer in all of that stuff, though. But the fear that was on my face, and the amount of shaking that my body was doing uncontrollably, I think were the real convincers for her. I told the cabin owner what happened, but he swore to me he'd never seen anything like that. He looked me in the eyes and promised, as a friend that I have known my entire life, that if he had known something like that would be out there, he would never have let us go. He hadn't been out there in 3 years. I think it's possible that this thing could have claimed the territory afterwards. Who knows? Richard to this day swears it was a werewolf. But I've researched these things, and a dogman is far more likely. I don't know if it was a full moon or not, but I have a hard time believing that a man can turn into something like this. I think it's far more likely that there's a creature out there that we have not discovered, or it's from somewhere else that we have not discovered, and that's what we encountered that day. The nightmares still happen. This was 6 years ago, and I still have nightmares about this that happened to me. I've never gone back out there. None of us have. Not even our family friend. The next person that got there, once it was sold, must have gotten one hell of a present with everything we left out there. I even heard the cabin was torn down a few years ago. I go to therapy still. The therapist says I should talk about it, which is why I'm telling you this. I think my therapist even believes me that I'm telling the truth, even though he won't admit it to me. I still don't understand why this thing was trying to jiggle the doors and get them open, when it looks strong enough to crash through the door itself. Did it really want to come in? Was it just trying to scare us? Once again, I don't have these answers for you, and I don't ever want to find out. Because if I did find out, for a fact, that these things wanted to come in and kill us, or eat us, the nightmares wouldn't just be a random occurrence. They would be nightly, to the point where I would never sleep again. And my therapist wouldn't help me at all. I pray to God I never run into one of these creatures again. I pray to God that one day these creatures will be exposed and the world will know how dangerous they are. Until then, I can only give you this fair warning. Stay out of the forest. There are things out there that we don't know about. There are things out there that are being covered up. There are things out there that can kill us. So please, I beg you, save your own life. Stay out of the forest. Sincerely, Jeremy.
Hello, Supernaturalist. My name is Ben Crockett. I have a Wolfman sighting for you that I'll still find hard to believe, even telling you here now. Even though this happened to me. I was the only one on the road during that encounter. Something I still wish was different. But what are you going to do about the past, right? I just wish someone else was there to tell me that what I saw was what I saw, even though I know what I saw. It would just give my story a little more proof for other people. I don't need any more proof myself. I know that Wolfman and Dogman are real now, and I hope I never see it again. For a good couple solid minutes, I really thought that I was going to die. I thought my ticket was punched, and I was about to pay a visit to good old St. Peter. Luckily, God was watching this old man that night, so I could live to fight another day. I hear some people actually want to come out and see these things. I'd strongly advise against that. It's enough to make you want to crap yourself when you come as close to this thing as I did. So, about what I saw. I was driving down the road at dusk, going pretty slow because the sun was in that spot in the sky where it's just brutal on your eyes, and you can't see very well. Off to my left, I see what looked like a pretty big carcass on the opposite side of the road. You see these things all the time out here, deer and such getting nailed by traffic, only this looked different than a deer. Fatter and white, and I could already tell that it was in pretty bad condition. I didn't know what it was at first. As I drove by it, I realized it was a cow. It looked like something really did a number on this poor old girl, because I could see all the blood even as I passed by in the dusk. Stupidly, I decided to take a better look. No one ever drove down this road much. I drove down that road a lot because I was on my way to work. I wasn't really worried about getting in the way of traffic or anything, though. I slowed down and turned my car around. Just curious, I guess. I parked a little bit off, keeping my lights and my hazards on, and got out for a better look. Thankfully, I even left the ignition running, because I didn't think I was going to be out there very long. To my surprise, when I got over to that girl, it was just carnage. Up close and personal like that, I could see everything that got ripped to shreds with that poor cow. She didn't get hit by a truck as far as I could tell. It looked like something ripped this poor cow's throat out. There was gore all over the place. Movie-style gore. The whole ground around the corpse was covered in blood. Absolutely covered. The whole belly was ripped open, and it was eaten. There were big, deep gashes on the sides of its chest. I counted 4 deep slashes on each wound, with a smaller gash on each that wasn't as deep. There are bears out there, so I guessed that cow was mauled by one. Little did I know. Even thinking that it was a bear, I still had a case of the chills. You just don't see this kind of violence and shrug it off. I just stared at the poor cow for a minute. frowning and giving her a silent hope that she didn't suffer for too long. All of a sudden, I got hit with this odor, like dirty animal or something, only much, much worse than anything I ever smelled. It was horrible, and I also realized it wasn't coming from that poor old cow either, because I didn't smell it when I first walked up on her. This smelled so bad, I actually gagged and had to mentally and physically keep myself from puking up my dinner. Then the air went all staticky, like it was charged up or something, like during a thunderstorm. But that static feeling started getting to my head. I started to feel a little bit confused, and then worried, like this fear just gripped me and seeped into my body. I could feel another chill in my arms and the back of my neck. Looking back, I think it was my body giving me a warning sign or something. And then I heard this deep, loud growl off to the side of me. I never heard anything like it before. I could feel the growl in my body. It was like the biggest, baddest, meanest growl in the entire world. You can imagine how quickly I turned around, thinking that it was still a bear. But what I saw wasn't no damn bear. I saw the damn wolfman standing about 20 feet away from me. A true-to-life wolfman. I wish it was a bear. I wish the bear had killed that poor cow. At least, then I'd have all the answers that I ever needed. I felt all the blood drain from my body, and my whole body tense up. You asked me for a description of this thing, so here goes. 7 feet tall, covered from head to toe in thick brown fur. Big, human-looking feet with big claws where the toenails should be. Long, muscular arms with hands, not paws, that were tipped with big claws too. A big, broad chest, no noticeable genitalia. A big, thick neck, and a big wolf's head on that neck. It had big, pointed ears and a long snout that had these massively sized teeth in its mouth. They were all pointed, and it had these big canine eyes that looked orange to me. It was also standing on 2 legs, and it was standing on the whole foot, not the toes like most of the sightings that I've listened to on your channel. When I turned and saw this thing, I hollered, and I hollered loud at that, and I jumped backwards. Hopefully, everyone can understand that reaction, even those crazies that want to have an encounter themselves. When I did holler, that thing roared in response, and when it did, it cocked its head to one side and bared its teeth, like it was saying, "This is my cow. This is my kill. Get the hell away from it." I pulled my gun off my hip and pointed it at this thing, but I was so shaky I couldn't even aim. This thing charged at me, and I fired. My shot hit the ground. I know it. I saw stuff fly up. When I did fire, this thing dodged to the side, like it knew what a bullet was. It dodged so fast that even if I aimed better, I probably still wouldn't have hit it. And then it started to advance on me again, and I took off to my truck. It followed me to my truck, growling the scariest growl that I have ever heard in my entire life. It was coming at me quick, and I fired again. I know I hit it this time, because I could hear the bullet hit meat, and it let out this roaring scream that it was so loud that it could wake the dead. I jumped in my truck and took off out of there as fast as I could. But this thing kept chasing me. I was sweating and crying to myself as I drove out of there, trying to put some speed on my truck. But it's an old beater, and takes a good while to gain speed. I did start to gain distance between me and it, but even then, it still chased after me. It didn't look like it was ever going to stop, or get tired. And it wasn't until I hit about what I think was 50 that this thing finally backed off and ran back into the woods. I don't really know if I was going 50 or not. I wasn't worried, I was just trying to get out of there as fast as possible. I didn't bother looking at the speedometer. I just wanted to get out of there. When I was far enough away, and back in town, might I add, I eased up a bit and pulled off to the side of the road. I got out of my truck and lost my dinner in the ditch this time. I was covered in sweat and still shaking. I looked back in the direction that I'd come from, and I think I even started hyperventilating again. I watched the woods for a good while, making sure this thing didn't run out of the tree line and attack. Then I drove to my dad's house and told him all about what I'd seen. I didn't want to be alone that night, so I ended up sleeping on his couch. The old man said he believed me. He could tell how scared I was. He didn't know what I'd seen, but he knew it had to be something that wasn't native to these parts for me to react like that. He sat there with me while we drank a bottle of whiskey, and I finally passed out. Up until I moved to Great Falls, I refused to ever take that road again. Honestly, I believe the cow had got out of its enclosure somehow and wandered off down the road that night. I think this wolf man or dog man or whatever it was smelled it, tracked it down and killed it because it knew it was an easier target compared to a deer. I think it was still in the area when I made my stupid move and it wanted to chase me off of its kill site. I think at first, it did a bluff charge at me. I read that sometimes they do that, but when I pulled my gun on it and started firing, I made it mad, and it chased after me. I probably wouldn't be here telling this tale today if I hadn't got back to my truck and sped off. And I still thank God that, for whatever reason, I left the truck running. This encounter happened to me about 10 minutes outside of Polaris, Montana, and it was in 2009. I'm still scared of it to this day. I know it was during the summer, although I can't remember what day of the week it was. I just know that it was a work day. After this encounter, once I figured out what it was that I saw, I started researching other encounters in my area, and found a couple in my parts. With all the forest and river access, I think this is a perfect place for a large carnivore like a dogman to make a home for himself. I know we have Bigfoot in the area too. I'd hate to see them go up against each other. There's two things about this event that scared me more than anything. The first one is that it was right on top of me. I mean, almost right on top of me before I saw it. And if it didn't growl at me, it probably would have been able to sneak right up next to me. This thing made zero noise. Not even sticks or rocks being stepped on made any sound at all. The growl almost makes me think that it wanted me to see it, and it wanted to scare me away. This thing had to weigh upwards of 600 pounds, maybe even more, and still made no noise at all. I know cougars can move like that when they're sneaking up on their prey, but this thing was enormous. It should have made some kind of sound, right? The second thing is that I've done research on the dogman creature that we discussed, and it fits most of the description, but what bugs me about it is the one I saw, where the legs and feet were different. I've read dozens and dozens of encounters where the feet are described as canine feet. Paws, not human feet. The one I saw had human-looking feet. Toes and everything. It also had human-looking legs. Not the way that canines stand on their toes. Digigrade, as you call it. This thing was flat-footed. Did I stumble on a different variation of the dogman? Or was it a werewolf? I've also listened to your encounters that you title werewolf instead of dogman. Are you trying to clarify that they're two different things? Because I think I could stomach the idea of a dogman a lot better than I can a werewolf. I'd rather have some kind of animal like dogman running around than a monster that has the face of a man sometimes. That one just sounds more terrifying to me, I guess. Hi, Supernaturalist. Please forgive the typing and grammar. English was never something I was good at. If you need to, please reword it to make it better for your channel. I want to tell you all about the time I saw a dogman, even though at the time, I thought it was more of a werewolf. This happened to me in Tennessee in 2011. I was 10 years old at the time. I just turned 19 in April. I don't want to tell you my name. I want to stay anonymous. What I felt that night, the fear that I felt, has never actually left me. I accept that that fear will always be a part of me. That's just the way it is. My family was visiting my aunt and uncle for a couple weeks in the summer of 2011. My dad and my uncle are brothers. We live in Texas, so they don't see each other a lot. In fact, this is the first time I'd ever even met my cousins. They live near the Great Smoky Mountains, although back then I thought they were called the Gray Smoky Mountains. I guess I was expecting where they live to be covered in smoke. Laugh out loud. Anyways, I have a little sister and brother. They aren't in this story much, but I just want to paint a picture for you, because when we got there, my cousins had already pitched a tent in their front yard for us to sleep in. It was weird to me that it was in the front yard, but I guess they didn't have a lot of neighbors, so it wasn't weird to them. My mom and dad said I could stay in the tent, but because my brother and sister were only 6 and 4 at the time, my mom and dad made them sleep inside with our youngest cousin. So it was me and my 2 cousins, who I'll refer to as Claire and Jack. Jack was 13. Claire was 10 like me. We thought we were awesome because we got to sleep outside all alone and stay up as late as we wanted to and tell scary stories. It sounded like a lot of fun at the time. I was just worried about wild animals. Jack kept telling me about how there were bears in the area, but Claire kept telling him to shut up. It was actually a lot of fun. We stayed up pretty late, talking and laughing. Like I said, I hadn't actually ever met them before, so it was fun to just get to know them, even if Jack was trying to scare me. It wasn't until after we all fell asleep that I was actually scared. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee. I held that pee in as long as I could, but eventually, I couldn't hold it any longer, and I left the tent to find the privacy that I needed. I didn't want to have an accident for the first time I ever met my cousin. I went to a tree, and this is where everything went from fun to horrible. As I was walking to the tree and starting to pee, I remember hearing all kinds of noises that the animals were making, like tripping bugs and stuff like that. But when I was in the middle of my pee, all those noises stopped. It was really quiet, and I remember feeling really freaked out. As I turned to go back to the tent, I saw a monster. It looked just like a werewolf. It was coming right towards me. At first, when I first noticed it, it was standing next to a tree. Then, when it saw that I noticed it, it started moving towards me. I remember trying to call for help, but I was so scared that no noise would come out of my mouth. I thought I lost my voice or something. It was like I couldn't take a big enough breath to call for help. I couldn't move either. I felt like all I could do was shake in fear. And even though I just peed, believe me, I peed more. In my pajamas. This thing was on 2 legs, and it started to move towards me with this limping walk. I think its leg was injured or something. It had its left arm tucked into its chest too. Like that arm was injured too. Here's what I remember it looking like. It was very tall. Obviously it was taller than me since I was only 10. But it looked taller than my dad too. Way taller. I would say it was almost 9 feet tall. It had gray fur. It was mixed with dark gray, medium gray, and light gray. The ears were long and pointy, and almost on top of its head. They were about 5 or 6 inches tall themselves. It had a long snout, but there weren't any teeth sticking out of the snout when it was closed. When it was open, all its teeth looked pointed to me, and really long. The arms looked buff and strong, but the right one looked in better shape than the left one. Both arms looked long, and they looked like they had a cross between a hand and a paw at the end of them. The fingers were curled inwards on both hands, and the fingers had long nails. The hair on its chest and thighs was longer than the rest of the body, but all the hair was pretty long. It had big legs too. They were buff just like the arms. The eyes looked yellow, or orange-yellow to me. When we were talking, you said a lot of people describe these creatures as a cross between something from Van Helsing and Underworld, but what I saw looks more like the werewolf from an old werewolf movie called Bad Moon Rising. That's what it looked like, but it looked a lot taller. It was only about 6 feet away from me when it stopped walking. It was so close that I could smell this awful smell coming from it. I remember the smell. It smelled like really strong pee and garbage mixed together. That's what its body smelled like. I could also smell its breath, which was just as bad. When I was 15, we had a dog that needed to go to the vet to have his teeth cleaned, and they found a rotten tooth that I guess needed to be pulled out, and that's why his breath smelled so bad. This thing smelled even worse than my dog's breath did. The dogman started sniffing the air around me. It made noises just like a normal dog would do, but the breath sounded deeper and bigger, like its lungs were huge. Looking at the size of this thing, it looked like it had huge lungs. I think it had to weigh at least 400 pounds. It was bigger than a bear. I really thought that it was going to eat me. I started crying and hyperventilating. I still couldn't even call for help. I was literally paralyzed in fear. People have said that isn't real. But I can tell you personally, you can be so scared you can't move or talk. This thing let out the deepest growl that I've ever heard. I think it actually shook my body inside. That's how deep the growl was. It was so loud that it woke my cousins up. I could hear them in the tent getting nervous and talking to each other. They were asking what that was, and then they noticed that I wasn't in the tent, and started freaking out too. They started calling my name and asking where I was. The dogman just turned its head to the tent and stared at it, like it was waiting for them to come out or something. It was just standing there, staring and blinking its eyes. That was the point that I thought it might be capable of human intelligence, because it acted so much like a person. It looked like it was just waiting to see what happened next. Or maybe it was just waiting for them to come out so we could eat all of us at the same time. I don't actually know. I just remember thinking that it looked almost human when it was looking at the tent. Then it looked back over at me, like it was waiting for me to respond to them, or to react or something. And then it actually took a deep breath and made a noise that sounded like a huff, like it was disappointed that we got interrupted or that they weren't coming out of the tent. Animals don't act like that. It acted like a human would. I could have sworn, too, that it narrowed its eyes at me, like it was annoyed or something. I guess that part could have been my imagination, or just the way the shadows fell on its face, but if I had to talk about it in a court of law, I would bet my reputation that that thing narrowed its eyes at me. Then, this thing slowly turned away from me in the direction of the woods, but as it did, it kept staring at me. It actually stopped, looked at me, and then dropped down to all fours, and trotted away down this little dirt path that goes into the forest on the side of my aunt and uncle's house. The way it walked when it was on all fours was different than the way it was when it was on two legs, though. It didn't have a limp or anything like that, and it seemed to be able to use all four legs without a problem. When it was going down the path, it was like I snapped out of it or something, because I started to cry, and I ran to the tent as my cousins were coming out. I grabbed them in a panic, and at this point I was sobbing. I started pulling them to the house, telling them that I saw a monster, and it went back into the woods. They told me I had to be dreaming, but I kept repeating that I saw a werewolf over and over and over again. I heard Claire mention something about the growl that they heard, but I was too scared to actually listen to them. I dragged them into the house, and we woke up all the adults. My parents were very worried about me because of how hysterical I was. I was still crying to them about what I saw, even though they were trying to calm me down. I told them all about what I had seen, even called it a werewolf, and told them that it went into the forest. My dad looked really mad at my uncle. I think because at this point they both thought it was a bear, and my dad was mad that he endangered me. My dad and my uncle went out looking for it with shotguns in my uncle's truck, even though I begged them not to. They still thought it was a bear that I'd seen, and I swore to them I knew the difference. Luckily, my dad has an open mind, and didn't just brush off what I had seen. I think deep down, he believed me. And later in life, he told me he believes in the supernatural, even though he's never seen anything himself, and he went out there to both protect us and try to see for himself. They were gone for over an hour. I thought I was never going to see him again. I was so scared while he was gone. I didn't want to be around any windows or anything. I didn't want that thing to come through the window and try to kill all of us while they were gone. I actually hid out in the bathroom while they were gone and refused to come out. I was still crying and couldn't even find a way to stop myself. I got so worked up, I even threw up. My cousins at this point were trying to tell my mom and my aunt that they didn't see anything, but they did hear a really deep growl that actually woke both of them up. And Claire ended up sitting in the bathroom with me while we waited. I could tell that she was scared too, because she wasn't saying much. When my dad and uncle finally came back, they said they didn't see anything. Needless to say though, I did not go camping out in that yard again while we were there, and Claire and Jack stayed in their rooms too. The three of us were pretty freaked out for the rest of the time that I was there. I think I actually fell into a depression of some sort while I was there too, because I was just so scared. I lost my appetite and just kind of moped around the house until we left. I'm pretty sure my aunt and uncle thought I was crazy. Being able to look back on it now as an adult, I don't think it was going to eat me. I actually didn't see any signs of aggression. I just think this thing was curious. I know if it wanted to, it could have grabbed me and dragged me off into the woods, and it wouldn't have had any trouble with it. I was just a scrawny kid, and this thing was huge. I really think it was just curious, even though seeing this thing is terrifying for a kid either way. I also think there has to be some kind of human quality to these dogmen, because of the way this thing was looking around and reacting to us. I don't know of any type of animal that acts like this thing did. I'll never forget this, and when I have kids of my own, I'll tell them all about it. I'll teach them that there are monsters out in the woods, and you need to respect the forest, because there are things out there that can kill you. And I'm not talking about bears, or cougars, or normal wolves. I'm talking about something else entirely. I'm talking about something called Dogman.